Also, for those of you in the room, please turn on the mics at the table when you have a question. Now I'll turn it over to Governor Dennis Daugaard.
Good noon. Thanks for joining in the conference, either bodily in Pier or on the phone. A couple of things that occurred last week that I think were noteworthy. First, I was very pleased to appoint Judge Kamala Thieler to the Second Circuit bench. She was a very impressive attorney there, has good experience in both civil and criminal work, and I know she's going to do a very good job as a new Second Circuit judge. We also have known for a little bit that Justice Glenn Severson of our Supreme Court is retiring this summer. And as you may know, Supreme Court justices are elected from different districts within the state, and the district from which Justice Severson comes is Sioux Falls. And Sioux Falls and some other northern counties north of Sioux Falls and a little bit west. And so I think it's very likely that not only did we appoint a new circuit judge from Second Circuit here this last week, we'll probably be looking to that area to replace Justice Severson. So it's very possible we'll have still another Second Circuit judge or someone from that area, which includes some other circuits as well, but certainly there's a large pool of Second Circuit judges that are likely to apply. So we're seeing a little bit of turnover, but very good, competent, and qualified applicants, and so that's something that's occurring. The other thing that occurred last week that was good news for us, of course, the Supreme Court granted certiorari on Friday. This was essentially the last group of cases that they were having court orders on. So we, because we're among the group of last cases to receive certiorari, will most likely be the last cases to be argued. And the last 2 weeks that the Supreme Court takes argument or hears argument in the October circuit is in the last 2 weeks of April. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the third week, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of the fourth week of April. And we're hoping it's the very last, so it gives our attorneys even more time to respond to the arguments that will be raised between now and then. So we're very pleased, as you may know, to have the justices grant certiorari is a rare thing. The vast majority of cases are not granted. In fact, I looked at the order before the one granting ours. I think they granted cert in 3 cases or 4, and then there were pages and pages and pages of cases that they denied cert. So we're very lucky. How does that happen? You need to have 4 justices vote to grant certiorari. And I'm hoping that's an indication that 4 justices want to change the law, hopefully in our favor. And the question is pretty narrow. You know, can an internet seller without a physical presence be required to collect? And because it's very narrow and we don't have a lot of extraneous issues or facts that could be argued or legal issues that could be argued, we're hopeful that the 4 that voted for certiorari are also inclined to vote for our side in the case. And if that's true, then we'd need 1 more justice to prevail. After the argument is made in April, very typically the court waits until June, and then in June, over a series of days, announces all their decisions from several weeks worth of hearings. So that's good news for us, and we're very pleased about that. I'm sure you have questions on other topics, so I'll open it up now for any question on anything at all.
Hi, Governor. The Senate today is aiming to avoid a government shutdown. Has there been any conversation between the Feds and your office about Rush Corner, the Avalanche, any other areas that
We have not talked at length about it. We've had a little conversation with some of our federal counterparts. Of course, the concern is not as great during this time of year. The visitation numbers are a tiny fraction of what they would be during the height of the summer when we've been confronting this problem before. I don't expect that we would take any action to keep Mount Rushmore open or keep the Badlands open or Jewel Cave or Wayne Cave. That being said, this administration takes note of the fact that in many cases we'll have situations where there are private contractors operating some of the features that a visitor will encounter. So for example, you go to Mount Rushmore, our icon, and the parking structure is operated by a contractor, and they're not affected by a federal government shutdown, so the parking structure could remain and will remain open. The same is true of the restaurant facility, and I think also the gift shop. It's run by Xanterra, which is a private contractor, and our conversations with Xanterra lead us to believe they will also stay open. Now, what will not happen? Well, you won't have the park security or the Forest Service superintendent and all their staff conducting programming. There will need to be some security, and I'm not sure how the federal government will deal with that. My thinking is whether a facility is open or closed, you need to have at least some skeleton security, and if need be, the state would certainly be willing to augment that security. There'd be no evening program, but of course there is no evening program in the winter anyway. So I do think the shutdown will impact some of the federal facilities if it occurs, but the tourism impact will be very minimal because the tourism interest is very minimal.
The state senate, some state senate leaders are talking about some ideas being floated around in their caucus about the non-standard water issue and possibly a couple more bills. They didn't specify what any of those might be, and I know legislators are working to extend the sunset. Would you support any other kind of rule changes to the issue, or do you still just kind of want to see what will happen in the summer?
Well, I have asked legislative leaders, or I've encouraged legislative leaders to be open to changes, but outside the bill I proposed. In other words, let's leave the sunset extension as a clean bill with no amendments and address that issue alone. And if there are ideas to improve in different ways, let those be offered in a separate bill. And I'm hoping that will be the case. And if that is the case, just as in any other policy arena, I'll want to hear the pros and the cons from both sides on the issue and try and judge how that squares with what I think is the right thing for South Dakota. So I'm open to that. I just don't want it to bog down the extension of the deadline, because otherwise the law is repealed entirely at the end of June, and if that were the case, we'd be back to having all those waters that were closed abruptly when the Supreme Court made its ruling, and we don't, and I know the citizens don't want that.
Governor, could we go back briefly on State Wayfair?
Yes.
Can you tell me, you're a member of the bar, can you tell me what you think the chances of the case, and what you think the strengths of the case, what argument you would like to see advanced? I understand you can't argue the case, but could you tell me what you think and what you would like to see the argument proceed as?
Well, I'm going to limit my remarks because I know that those who oppose us are looking to any avenue to find the means to weaken our arguments. But I know one of the arguments we've openly made is this is really one area of taxation where this kind of physical presence is required. In other areas, and I honestly can't point to any of them, but I'm told that in other areas which are similar, no such physical presence is a precondition to enforcing a tax that's imposed by the state. I also think that if you remember that Wayfair Quill and the cases that preceded Quill, that set up Quill, were early 1990s or earlier. And it really was only in the early 80s that the internet even became, that computers existed and later internet arose. And so the Quill decision was a catalog sales case. And you have to think about how threatening and how burdensome is the loss of catalog sales taxes when so little of retail commerce was and is conducted through catalog retailing and purchasing. Conversely, the rise of internet purchasing is abounding and accelerating, and so it is threatening and it is worrisome to states that rely upon sales taxes, particularly states that have no income tax and rely disproportionately on sales taxes. And then when you counter, or when you add to the fact that the burden and threat to a state is increasing, the fact that the burden upon the collector is declining as computers have greatly simplified the challenge to a retailer. If I sell to Dennis Daugaard in Garrettson, South Dakota, if I can look up his zip code with the 4-digit extension, I know exactly where he lives and which taxing jurisdictions have him subject, or to which taxing jurisdictions he's subject, and I know what the tax rate is because a computer program does it for me. So it's quite simple to, and you think about it, Amazon is doing it voluntarily, and many, many other retailers are doing it voluntarily. And so the burden on retailers has gone down considerably. The threat to sales tax collections has gone up and is increasing considerably. And so for those two reasons, I'm very hopeful that they'll say, hey, it's a new world, and we should look at that in the light of that new world.
If I could just follow up on that, do we have any idea of projections of what a reversal of this decision could mean in terms of additional sales tax or revenue to the state of South Dakota? Just a projection.
We really don't. It's difficult to say what those people who are not reporting to us, what they're not giving to us, would be. We do know that about a third of our sales tax collections are for services. And as I pointed out in the budget speech, most services can't be bought online. You can't change your oil online. You can't get a haircut online. But you can buy video streaming as a service. You can buy storage of videos and photographs online. So you can buy some services online, but many you cannot. And so we are capturing and are not threatened by internet sales in the area of services so much as we are in the area of goods. So if you assume that we're relatively well situated with respect to services, look at the goods, that's about 2/3 of our sales tax revenue. Some of those internet sales of goods we are collecting today. They are voluntary payers like Amazon. When we passed Senate Bill 106, more than 100 additional voluntary payers registered and have been paying sales tax since then. Even prior to that, we had people who are registered with the Streamlined Sales Tax Initiative. Why is there software? Why is it easier for retailers? Because a bunch of the states, including South Dakota, got together and said, let's simplify our tax systems. Let's pay for some computer programs. Let's get this thing easy for retailers to manage. And so once we did that, many voluntary payers came forward. And then there is a fraction of internet sales that are not voluntary payers. They are mandatory payers because they have physical presence here. But we can't, it's hard to segregate that out. If you've got an XYZ retailer in South Dakota having a brick and mortar store, they might be filing a sales tax form that does not separate the sales that are made in the store versus the sales that are made over their internet site. In both cases, they have to pay, they're mandatory, but we can't tell what share of their total bill comes from the internet and what share comes from their stores. So for those reasons, it's a guess. In our brief, we talk about a 10-year-old study that the University of Tennessee did, which was a $50 million loss. That included the sales tax being lost by municipalities. You know, we have 4% for now, 4.5% at the state level, up to 2% at the municipal level. Most cities are at 2%. So that would be the entire, at that time, 6% loss would be 50 million, according to Tennessee. So those are the reasons why it's difficult to put a number on.
Governor, what's your stance on the campus free speech bill, House Bill 1073?
You know, I have not looked at that. Well, I shouldn't say I haven't looked at it. I've glanced at it. I don't pretend to be an expert on free speech, but as I read some of the provisions, it occurred to me, I wonder if some of this proposed statutory language isn't already the law, either because of case law that defined the Constitution or other law that exists at the state or federal level. But again, I don't pretend to be an expert. I want to hear from those who are, who testify either in support or opposition to it, to understand better what this would do, or is it creating law that already is there, or just restating law that already exists, or what does it change? That's what I would want to know. What does it change? And I'm not sure I understand that just from the bare reading of it.
Governor, there's a work group that's been appointed to look over the legislature's rules and terms of conduct. Would you have any areas that you think they should look at, just because of national movements that have come up, or any other reason, anything that might be outdated?
Well, when it comes to the rules that the legislature passes to govern the conduct of its members, I try to stay out of that. That's their business. I do think it's good that they undertook some anti-harassment training, certainly in the wake of what we've seen in the press through, misbehavior of political figures, of media figures, of Hollywood figures. It's something we see too often, and most of us learned how to behave from our parents, and we behave appropriately, but some people have to be reminded a little more overtly. And so I think that training was good. I will say, too, that the state, when I was at Children's Home Society, we had regular anti-harassment training, both with respect to sexual harassment or racial harassment or religious. Any kind of harassment is harassment. I remember when I was the new guy on the water tower welding and painting crew, that was my name. New guy, go do this. New guy, go do that. They called me new guy. And so it was a form of harassment, and I didn't like it. I got by fine, but it really pales in comparison to some of the discomfort that some people have been made to feel in their workplace, and it shouldn't be something that we permit, or certainly something we should handily discourage. The state is trying to do better. We've had policies against harassment. I asked our Department of Human Resources to find some new online training that we could implement, and all of the executive branch employees, I want to say about a month and a half ago, I asked them to undertake this online training over the next several months. The deadline is mid-February, I think, and I think about 60% of them have already gotten it done. And hopefully that'll prevent a few instances that might have otherwise occurred. I know I also asked our employees who supervise others that in the course of their annual supervisory discussion of performance, how'd you do this year, Dennis? They should remind their employees of the front page of the handbook, the first page after my welcome letter, very clearly points out our policy against harassment, and I'm asking every employee to sign a piece of paper acknowledging they understand they are held to these policies, including the anti-harassment policy. So we're trying to do a little bit more to encourage people to pay attention to what the rules are and remember, how to behave, and so that everyone feels treated respectfully in their environments.
Can you say what the subject of the training was?
Anti-harassment.
Generally?
Yeah, in general, I guess I looked at a little bit of it in terms of trying to decide, is this, it's good, and I thought it was pretty good.
And switching gears, I think last year you signed a bill that ended collective bargaining at the tech schools. The speakers talked about ending collective bargaining in the educational system. Is that something you support?
I would.
Why?
Well, I think I've observed that some of our institutions can be a little bit hidebound, and in some cases, I worry that the unions have created situations where it's difficult for the administration to retain those who should be retained, and yet discipline or manage those who need that. And so I think this is one step, especially in the public arena, where the Constitution very clearly gives states authority to disallow unionization in public governments, where we should consider that.
And then there's a different topic. Senator Kennedy has a bill that would reduce the ingestion penalty for ingesting drugs from a felony to a class 1 misdemeanor. Is that something you would consider if allowed for the population in the states?
Well, I would have to understand, I certainly believe that ingestion or any kind of possession, whether it be ingestion or literal possession outside the body, should be an indication of need for holding a person accountable through treatment and not necessarily through incarceration. And you've heard me express my dismay that we incarcerate too many people for nonviolent offenses. Now, when it comes to distribution or manufacture, I think they're more a root of a problem that is certainly very concerning, especially in the meth area. So I'd certainly be open to that. I'd need to understand exactly what is being proposed, and I'd want to hear counsel from both sides. I'd be open to it. It doesn't offend me right out of the gate.
House Bill 1072 is a provision revising certain provisions regarding the trust. And there's a section in the bill that sets up the trust for any lawful or charitable purposes. Would you, I guess, help explain that? Is that something that would be new for us?
No. I did look at that bill just because that's, I spent 10 years in trust administration, so I'm interested in that aspect of the law. Although it's been so long, I don't pretend to be an expert on the current trust laws in South Dakota. I know a little bit about it. But I did look, and as I read into the bill, it was clear that it was intended to rewrite the statutes that already permit purpose trusts. And I did not get through the whole bill. It's a long bill. Gosh, I want to say 30 pages or so. More than 20, I know. And I have lots of time on my hands, as you can imagine. But, no, just kidding. I did want to spend some time on it, but it's too long for me to wade all the way through it. I do have, I'm aware that this bill arises at the behest of the Trust Task Force that I appointed. And we have some legislators that are represented on that task force, including Representative Lust, who I respect. And I know one of the proponents was Pat Getzinger, an attorney from Rapid City, whom I also respect. And So I think that law is something I'm going to be easily supporting. I haven't seen anything that causes me concern at this point.
The South Dakota general philosophies surrounding, the trust and distribution of the state.
Sure, I think South Dakota has always been a very good place to have a trust. Most people generally, as a general rule, create trust for two purposes. One, control. As an example, if a parent is on their deathbed and they have a young or inexperienced child that they want to pass their assets to, but that child is, whether they be 15 or 25, is deemed not experienced enough to manage those assets. Maybe the scale is, or the nature of the assets are unusual enough that they want to be sure someone in whom they have more confidence, maybe someone with more experience in managing assets, they want to put that set of funds or businesses into their hands, and you, Daugaard, you run this as trustee for the benefit of my son Bill or my daughter Mary until they reach a certain age, or in the meantime you can give them all the income, or in your discretion, subject to certain standards, you can give them some of the principal. Those are common control reasons for creating trusts. The other reason is taxes, and sometimes they're designed to utilize tax law, and not in any nefarious way, but utilize what are the rules under current tax law and structure my property and distribution of assets in such a way that I minimize my taxes. Everybody does that. You know, can I accelerate my deductions into this year or push my income into next year? That's a tax planning exercise that is perfectly legal, and many people do that. What makes South Dakota especially good in the latter case is some trusts are created for generations. You might have someone who's very wealthy and whose children he or she has not confidence in, or want to be sure that they're protected and freed from the management responsibilities. So they'll literally create a trust that lasts for their children's entire lives and then goes on to the grandchildren. Another way of doing it is just give it to the children, and the children typically give it to the grandchildren at death. So it's one means versus another. But what makes South Dakota particularly attractive in that situation are two things. One, South Dakota does not have an income tax on trusts. And in many states, if you have a trust like this that may be accumulating income, you would pay taxes on that accumulation, state taxes. You also pay national taxes in either case, whether you're in South Dakota or any other state. You will pay a federal tax on trust income if you accumulate it. And then, so that's the first thing, our lack of an income tax. Just as it's attractive to businesses, it's attractive to trusts. And then the second thing is some states have an old common law rule that says trusts may extend no longer in existence than lives in being plus 21. So imagine if we knew every life on earth that existed today, we added 21 years to it, any trust that was created today could not continue past that deadline. Well, South Dakota has repealed that law. So people don't have to worry about, can I create a trust for my children and my grandchildren or even my great-grandchildren? Yes, you can in South Dakota. Yes, you can in other states. But South Dakota is maybe earlier into the establishment of laws. So why are we attractive? One, we're one of the very few states that have no income tax. So there's maybe, what, 5, 6 like that? Washington, Texas, South Dakota, Florida. There's a couple of others, I can't think of it. So they would be attractive from the income tax side. And some of them, a number of them, have repealed the rule against perpetuities, just as we have. So it's probably a longer litany than you wanted, but that's why trusts are attracted to South Dakota.
Governor Pickett, a brief comment on the governor's tourism conference, your thoughts
Yes, well, I was very pleased to see 8 consecutive years of growth, and as I think about it, I've been governor, well, what a coincidence. But it certainly is a coincidence, but it is a good news. And we've had some tough times, when you think about in 2012, we had, we all were concerned about the Legion Lake fire that ultimately burned over 50,000 acres. Well, in 2012, we had a fire season that, and adding the Legion Lake fire to other fires, wildfires that we've had in South Dakota, we probably ended the year with 60,000 acres burned. Well, in 2012, we had over 200,000 acres burned. And fire was in the news again and again and again in 2012. And this was our only Type 2 incident. We had multiple Type 2 incidents in the Black Hills in 2012. And that caused some people to worry, can I get there? You have to also remember in 2011, we had the Missouri River flood, which took out part of I-29 for a period of time. You couldn't drive from Omaha to Sioux City, and if you can't get from Omaha to Sioux City, you might think, well, my easy route to the Black Hills is gone, because if I take 80 over, then I have to get on a 2-lane highway, and it's not worth the hassle, and so I'm not going to go. And so we had a lot of challenges. We had record gas prices during those 8 years. It's an unpleasant memory now, but that also causes people to reconsider their travel plans. So to have 8 years in a row of good growth and continued growth, it's great to see. And I think it's because we've just been our travel industry, I should say, has been very creative and intent on marketing South Dakota, reinventing themselves, making themselves more attractive. One of our award winners last night was the Great Plains Zoo in Sioux Falls, and that's just a shortened name. Great Plains Zoo and Delbridge Museum of Natural History in Sioux Falls. Their visitor numbers jumped considerably, and their gift shop sales went up, I think, almost 20% last year when they were able to get koala bears from the San Diego Zoo, and they used that as an attraction in very unique and inventive ways to get a lot of attention from the public and drive people to come to the zoo when they probably wouldn't have otherwise come. Linda and I went with our grandkids and kids to see the koalas. And would we have gone to the zoo? No, probably not. We like the zoo, and we always say, let's go to the zoo sometime, but we just don't get around to it. But hey, the koala bears are here for 2 more weeks. If we go today, we can get, that's what they did. They used a marketing hook like that. And so did many of our visitor industry partners. They figured out ways to use big data in ways that you couldn't use it 10 years ago, to figure out who are the people, what is their nature, what age ranges, what magazines do they read, what websites do they visit, and let's find them there with our advertising. And so much more targeted, much more strategic, and successful because of that. And I will also say Jim Hagan is just a tremendous leader of our tourism effort. Everyone in the industry loves him. Everyone in his department loves him. I've been threatened by other governors who have tried to attract him away, and there have been a couple of states whose governors I don't like quite as well as I used to, because they were trying to poach him, but unsuccessfully so. And he's just a very good leader of tourism, and he's on the Travel USA board, national travel. I was glad he could do that, because I knew that would give him more access to more variety of ways others, but I also knew it would expose him to others who would try and poach him. And so you take that risk, and so far we've not lost him. But yeah, it's been a good year for tourism, and I think Jim and his team have a lot to do with it, but so does the industry.
Turn it over to the phones. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone else in the room?
I I was just curious, I think the speaker is trying to get a tobacco tax hike in the legislature. If you would rather go to the ballot, would you sign that for?
You know, I'd certainly look at it, but I don't think I would. I'm aware that he has the proposal. I don't think it'll get to my desk. But if it does, I'm concerned that it will drive sales into Minnesota. Right now, Minnesota's tobacco tax is higher than ours. And I think a lot of Minnesotans are coming to, is it Minnesota or Iowa? I think it's Minnesota. Either Minnesota or Iowa, we're getting a lot of cross-border purchasing, I'm going to guess, because you won't go across the border to buy a pack of cigarettes, but you will a carton. You're talking some serious money when you buy a carton of cigarettes these days. So I think if we raised our tax, I think we'd lose some sales to other states. We will drive some people to stop smoking. Now, that's a good thing, health-wise, bad thing revenue-wise, but good thing health-wise. But in the case of cross-border purchasing, you don't get the good quitting, but you do get the burden of losing that tax revenue that you would otherwise collect from your own citizens. So I'd be a little bit worried about that. The other thing is when the citizens last raised cigarette taxes by the ballot, we had guessed about how much, because it's a guess. You have to judge human behavior, and you have to decide, you know, what cross-border changes will occur. And we were off about 5 or 6 million, as I recall. Well, that's a lot of money. And so we might guess what we think the impact will be, but that's still a guess. We know with pretty good certainty what our trend is today, and if we stay status quo, we know with some certainty what we'll get tomorrow. So for those reasons, I'd be a little worried about supporting that. And the speaker knows that.
You opened up comments talking about there being a vacancy on the Supreme Court this summer.
Yes.
Is that a seat plan to fill, or do you get away from the next governor, or the next administration?
No, I will fill it. The Supreme Court in South Dakota, unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, must take every case appealed to it. And so there's a volume that's, you know, that grows every little bit every year, and every single case is heard, and so there's a workload that must be continued to be handled. And if there's a gap in time, we can get some former justices to come and sub, or we can get some experienced circuit court judges to come and sub, but that only works a little bit, and certainly we wouldn't want to try and use that for 6 months till a new governor is elected and then have them start the vetting process, and it's probably going to take a few months after that. So it would end up being a good year, or a good 3/4 of a year, I would say, if I left it for the next governor. So I will fill the vacancy. Okay, thank you all.
Do you have a